Good afternoon, welcome to the Health and Wellbeing Board today. It's great to see a nice full middle bit starting the day. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in a moment. Can I just make sure that you've got your phones turned off and just remind you that the meeting is being webcast live. And could we just take any apologies before we start with the introductions?
We've got apologies from Rachel Spencer Hensel, Liz Mear, Len Richards, Catherine Riley and Sean Rayner. And on our internet connection, where is she? We can't see her in the room. Is there a possibility we can get Karen up on the screen, except when the slide's up, so that we can see her? Or one of them. That's it. There, I can see you now, Karen. Sorry. Okay, so I'd just like everybody to introduce themselves. We're just going to go across the front row, back and across. We'll introduce the people who are speaking as they come to it. So if we start with you, my dear.
Good afternoon. James Cregan. I'm CEO of Kirklees and Calderdale Care Association, representing independent, private and PCSE social care providers.
Thank you, Chair. Michelle Cross, Exec Director, Adults on Health, Kirklees Council.
Thanks, Chair. Tom Brailsford, Executive Director for Children and Young People.
Hello everybody, I'm Emily Parry-Harris, I'm Consultant in Public Health.
Good afternoon, I'm Steffi Rogers, I work at Third Sector Leaders and I'm the Community Champions Lead.
Hi, I'm Liz Towns-Andrews from the University of Huddersfield. I'm the Regional and the Business Lead for the National Health Innovation Campus.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Brennan. I'm the Director of Partnership Development for the Kirklees ICB.
Hello, I'm Warren Gillibrand. I'm Head of Nursing in the School of Human Health Sciences at the University of Huddersfield.
And the Deputy Chair.
And the Deputy Chair.
Good afternoon everybody, I'm Ross Harvey. I'm a General Manager for Adult Mental Health Community for SWIFT. I'm deputising for Sean Rayner today.
Nice to see you. Do you want to pull your microphone towards you a little bit, just a bit quiet?
Hi everyone, Chris Fox, Director of Customer and Community Services at Connect Housing.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Groves. I'm the Services Manager at Change Grow Live Kirklees, which is the Drug and Alcohol Treatment Services.
Hi everyone, I'm Alistair Brown, Chief Executive with Kirklees Active Leisure and here today representing Third Sector Leaders.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Lisa Williams, I'm Deputy Director of Transformation and Partnerships at CHFT and I'm here for Catherine Riley.
Thank you, everyone. Just to point out, we will be formalising our new members, but it's really nice to see, so that they can vote, but it's really nice to see that we've already got Claire from Change Grow Live has joined us, and Steffi from the Community Champions are going to be essential parts of helping us look at our way forward with our big plans for this year. So the first item we have to deal with is looking at the minutes of the previous meeting. Somebody who's here, please propose those. Yeah, I've got Warren behind you. Will you second them then? Thank you. That's great. And everybody happy with them? So there's only quite a different makeup today. Does anybody have any interest to declare? No? And all items on the first part of the agenda are for the public to attend. I don't think we've got any members of the public. Then we will be going into private session where we'll be having discussions around regeneration and a presentation about actions being taken by the council in Huddersfield and Dewsbury. We don't have any deputations or petitions, do we? We don't, and we don't have any formal public questions. So, first substantive item today is looking at the CQC inspection notification, and we have Michelle Cross, our still relatively new DAS, Director of Adult Social Services in Kirklees. So it's nice to welcome you as the DAS for the first time to the Health and Wellbeing Board. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair, and yes, 2 weeks in, so be gentle. So thank you, Chair. I've been asked to do a quick update on the current notification that we've had in Kirklees from CQC. I'll just do a bit of background information for those who don't necessarily get regulated and are inspected by CQC. So CQC, which is the Care Quality Commission, are the regulator for health and care in England. CQC already do inspect all our registered provisions, such as care homes, hospitals and specialist care providers, and local authorities used to get inspected by then the Commission for Social Care Inspection, but that duty was removed some years ago. However, CQC piloted their new framework last year with 5 different councils, and through that pilot there was several sort of learning aspects, and CQC then have started to roll out inspections across the country. The focus of the inspections is how well local authorities perform against their duties under the Care Act, and the interest seems to be on frontline. Hasn't necessarily focused on managers and leaders. However, that approach is maturing, and they are now speaking to leaders, and that's through feedback from pilot sites and also from councils that have been inspected. So just to say that we did get our notification on the 9th of December, which was a great Christmas present for the teams in Kirklees. And what that means in reality is you have to do your return, which has 38 elements to that, and that return had to be done by the 10th of January. So the teams worked tirelessly throughout Christmas to make sure that we did gather the relevant evidence, and we did submit 120 pieces of evidence to CQC, and that comprised of data, intelligence, performance data, case studies, a whole plethora of information that did support the IR 38. Once that is done, we are then waiting for the formal notification for CQC to actually come and do the inspection. That can take anything from 6 weeks to 6 months, which is a very different framework from our colleagues who are inspected by Ofsted. Ofsted give, is it 2 weeks, 2 days notice, then 2 weeks they're on site, 1 week, sorry Tom. We will see, and it's a bit of a watching brief. We then have to submit our self-assessment, which is incredibly lengthy. That is done once we receive the date when they will be on site, and we do get 8 weeks to gather that evidence, which does give teams a lot of time. We will also, during that 8-week period, will be briefing Health and Wellbeing Board, our portfolio holder, which is Councillor Raddy, our key partners and leaders across the council. We do have a lot of support from our local government association and our ADAS colleagues, and we're in the process now of making sure that there are workshops being planned with frontline staff, with leaders. I think there is a specific session for elected members, our portfolio holder and our leadership team. And LGA will come and do sessions up to 100 staff, which I think is great. The difficulty that we do have in this space is if it's 6 months, you are constantly in that updating information, gathering case studies. When we do get the formal notification, we'll have to submit 50 cases, which they will then decide which cases they actually look at, and that actually addresses the customer journey, and that is what they will be assessing. The principal social worker plays a key role because obviously we're assessed against our Care Act duties, so she will be working across the region making sure that she's well prepared for the inspection, because they do spend a lot of time with the PSW. So I think what I will be proposing, Chair, if that's okay, once we have the notification, we'll come back to board so that board members are fully briefed on what the intentions are and how much support and preparation we'll need to give to partners across the whole partnership across Kirklees. Is that okay?
Yep, that's great. And so well done over the Christmas period to you and your team, because that was, we've been very busy before Christmas, and it was a bit of a bombshell to have it come in at that time, and when everybody probably did need a break, but give people the due, they were in and they were at it. So I once again like to say well done to them. There is lots of prep to be done in terms of prepping other people who need to know what they're going to be asked, what's going to be asked of them. So as you say, it could be up to 6 months, but we will get 8 weeks notice, and that's right. And then at the end of the day, they're only in the buildings for 2 days, is that right?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I forgot to mention that. CQC are actually only on site 2 days, which is a very short window of time, so you've got to be very succinct in who they speak to, very succinct in terms of your opening presentation. I'm told that the opening presentation is generally done on Teams, which seems quite odd and seems at odds with what Ofsted do. However, that seems to be working for other local authorities. And I think, again, we will be talking to individuals who will be present in that opening presentation. It can be a whole room of people, or it can be just the leadership, and we'll be gathering sort of thoughts on that from across our regional colleagues. And just to say, they are sweeping through Yorkshire and Humber. I think 3 other local authorities got the notification this Monday. So I suspect once they're in Yorkshire and Humber, the whole Yorkshire and Humber will be done within a few months. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I have every confidence that you've got everything in hand for that. And as you say, unfortunately, if it is a long wait, we'll have to keep rebriefing people. But everything is in hand, as I say. Carol, I know you were due to come in a little late. So could you just introduce yourself, please? Sorry, I know you were due to, you couldn't get here before now. We've all done introductions as usual, so could you perhaps introduce yourself, and I'll take Karen to introduce herself as well, because we had her online and I didn't get to do that.
Apologies for being late. I'm Carol McKenna. I'm the place lead for Kirklees Health and Care Partnership.
And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Jackson. I'm the Chief Exec at Locala, which is the community service provider.
Which also means I've checked your microphones working and everything. We can hear you up there, so that's fantastic. Great. Agenda item number 8, and we've got an hour to look at this and to ask questions. So I really want you to be thinking about how this affects you, how it affects our residents, and in what ways we want to look at how this goes forward with us, not just over here in economy and regeneration, because well-being comes from a whole raft of things, and the economic well-being of the area in an inclusive way is very important to that. So I'll hand you over to Edward Highfield, and can you introduce the team you've got with you to present for us today, please, Edward?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Edward Highfield. I'm a Service Director for Skills and Regeneration at the Council. I'm joined by Chris Duffel on my left, who is Head of Service for Business and Skills, and Jonathan Nunn from our policy team, who's done all the hard work and can take difficult questions. So I'm very conscious on this that there's some of you that have had the pleasure of seeing me do this 3 or 4 times, and there's some of you that haven't. So I'm going to try and rattle through the strategy bit of it quite quickly. There's absolutely an offer of more deeper conversations offline if it's of interest to you. But what I'm trying to do is move this on from, yes, we're going to have a strategy, so what's it say, why are we doing it, what are the key points of it, but then moving quite quickly into the so what question about action, and to try and tee up your contributions and your thoughts on all the things we need to do, because as you will well know, we can have the best strategy in the world, but it's the actions that will make the difference. So briefly, I'm just going to go through why and what we mean by an inclusive economic strategy, what it's saying, how it's structured, and where we are in the process, and how you can provide more comments if you wish. And then really just try and look ahead in terms of, and this is where hopefully it will tee up more of a discussion around some of the actions that we have as a whole system around health, and kind of pound every time someone says systems. But there's a lot we need to do between the traditional economic development and employment skills world and the health worlds, and increasingly those coming together to work on delivery of programs over the next few years. So that's new areas, new relationships, new work ahead of us. And then to try and tee up some other conversations that I think this board can really add value to over the coming months. So I'll try and go through this quickly. The economic strategy is one of our 4 top-tier strategies in Kirklees. It currently expires this year, 2025, so of course we're going through a process of refreshing and reviewing that. We have a draft, it is nearly complete, it's yet to go through the political process for endorsement. And I suppose one of the big signals that we're trying to make this time is it's deliberately called an inclusive economic strategy rather than a growth plan or a growth strategy, and that's reflecting the point around the data and the inequality that we see in Kirklees. So I always say yes, economic growth is important, but it's not the only objective. It's not growth at any costs. We could, as an overall aggregate economy, be growing at 2-3% a year. That would feel lovely, but if it's not addressing the drivers of inequality and closing those gaps, then it's not going to have the effect that we need it to have in Kirklees. So there's a lot of national debate about growth. We're seeing the consequences of slow growth or no growth on the exchequer, and so of course growth is important, but it's not growth at any cost. It has to be a more inclusive type of growth. So that's the big question really, is, well, how do you do that then? We've not managed to do that for the last 20-30 years. What's going to be different this time? That is fundamentally the question that we've been grappling with. The other point I always make is that we don't control the economy. You know, what happens globally, what happens with the new president of the United States and trade wars, if China invades Taiwan, there's an awful lot of things that could have such a huge impact on Kirklees' economy that we simply don't control. But we do need to try and create the environment where businesses can succeed. Again, we are big employers in this room, and we'll talk about that later, but by and large, businesses create growth, businesses create employment. We need to try and make Kirklees a good place to start and grow a business. So all the different factors that go into that. So we don't control the economy. Our job is to try and create the conditions for growth and inclusive growth. But we do have budgets, we do have spend, we do have economic development activity, we do bid for funding, we do invest council resources. As partners, we do leverage significant firepower. So we have choices to make about where we put our proactive effort and investment, and that's what this strategy is also about. So we can't solve everything, but we can do certain things, and this strategy has to give us the guiding framework for what we choose to invest in. Again, I won't dwell on these, but the point I'm trying to make here is that a growing economy is vital for achieving all the other outcomes. So I don't think growth is an outcome in its own right. I think it's an enabler of our achievement of other outcomes. And I always say these are hard to tackle in a growing economy. You try tackling them in a declining economy, it'll be even harder. So that's a bit about growth. In terms of the strategy, this is all I wanted to say really on the strategy itself. This is the framework. So the chapters of people, place and partners, or in this case, given it's an economic strategy, really the business community are the main focus of that partner section. But people, place and business is the main structure of the document, underpinned by cross-cutting themes or objectives around productivity, inclusion and sustainability. So a brief bit on each of those. Productivity. That is our challenge in Kirklees. Some people don't like the term productivity. It's a bit cold, it's a bit abstract, but fundamentally productivity drives wages. You know, the average adult in Kirklees, if we had average levels of productivity, so if we match the UK average in terms of productivity, every adult in full-time employment in Kirklees would have £70 a week extra in their pocket. So for a family of two, that'd be 140 quid a week into a family if we were to get to national averages of productivity. It's a huge task, it's going to take us a long time, but you know, serious impact. So of course you can think through immediately why that has the impact it does on people's life chances and opportunities. So productivity, getting more productive businesses, a greater share of employment in higher value sectors is really, really important because it drives wages. There's a lot that can be done for businesses to make productivity gains. We need to identify those and support those that want to. Sustainability clearly is around climate emergency, use of resources and future resilience to climate change and climate shock. And then inclusion, as we've said, it has to be more inclusive. We've done a lot of analysis over the bottom decile of the population, and we do see widening disparities, not narrowing disparities. So again, that comes back to that question about if you know, what's the phrase about a rising tide lifts all boats? Well, the evidence doesn't actually sustain that around our population. So we have to be doing something different, and you can't just rely on that happening organically. And the reason that's drawn as it is because I go back to that point around we don't control the economy, but we do have resources, we do have investment choices. We need to be making those choices where they tackle at least two, if not all three of those things at the same time. So in part of my answer to what's going to be different this time is think for too long we might have done something that's great for productivity but isn't doing anything for sustainability and might even be pulling in the opposite direction of inclusion. Going forward, if we have got limited resources, obviously there's an action plan that needs to sit behind this. We wish it was bigger, but where we do have actions, they need to be in the middle of that Venn diagram, doing things that we can demonstrably say is tackling at least two, if not all three of those things at the same time. Otherwise, is it really something we should be focusing on? So from a delivery point of view, we now need to take that and say, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of our future projects, future commissioning of activity? But that's one thing that I think is going to be different going forward, and we need to walk that particular walk now. And then in terms of the document itself, this is the plan on a page. Obviously, there's the evidence base, the vision, those principles I've talked about. And then under the sections of people, business and place, there's the things that I think you'd probably expect to see in an economic strategy. The people strand is very much linked to our employment and skills strategy around young people, around digital, around skills for the future, not just people out of work, but people in work and their progression. And we'll come back to some of those people initiatives at the end of this presentation. And businesses, start-up, growth and survival of indigenous businesses, inward investment from outside, and also things like social value and shared ownership models and social value. So not just the businesses that are here already, but also different forms of business and how we can try and keep some of that money more locally grounded. And then on place, some of the physical aspects that influence the economy, those wider determinants, which again we might come back to later, but the role of our town centres, our regeneration plans, rural areas, transport, housing, place, so those sorts of things. So there'll be a section on each of those under the headings of people, business and place. So we're going to have a strategy. It's going to be lovely. We've got a draft. We can have as many follow-up conversations as people want, really. We are at the process where it's largely written, but we can still amend it. We need to make it look pretty. We need to get the case studies right. There's quite an important bit about some numerical targets because we are refreshing our local plan, and it will be infinitely stronger if the numerical targets from the economic strategy and the numerical targets of the local plan are the same. So that's what we're doing. When we've done that, we will bring it through Cabinet. We will bring it through full council. But so what? We've got a strategy. It's really, as I said, the actions that flow from it that are really, really important. So this is meant to just now be a bit of a segue into the conversation for you to pick up on. I think this, obviously for this audience, I wanted to just dwell on the fact that I think we've all known the links between health and the economy, but this document probably writes them down in a clearer, more stronger fashion than perhaps previous versions of documents in Kirklees has done. And that obviously talks about health as a barrier. All of these things have got the vice versa, so you can cut each way. You know, the impact that poor health has on your economic opportunities, the impact that your economic opportunities has on your health. We know, you know better than me, that the social determinants of health are, I think originally they said go in the wrong direction, but I've put persistently stubborn. But we know we have significant challenges in the quality of our housing stock in the public and the private sector, low incomes, and there's analysis coming out all the time around low incomes, and all those aspects are going to take many, many years to shift, and that has a huge impact on people's health. We know that things like waiting times, people that is itself a huge barrier to employment for some people. The flip side of that, of course, is how better health can be an enabler and how better employment outcomes can be an enabler of your health and vice versa. And there's loads of new initiatives, and that's going to be a major focus for the new government, and I've got a slide on that in a second. But thinking then more broadly, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir a bit here, but health as a sector, health as a major employer, I don't know how many thousands of people in Kirklees that you all employ in this room. One of the, it's not unique, but it's distinctive about the Kirklees economy is generally, there are huge generalisations of course here, but where you have people that are living in Kirklees, if they're earning good money in the private sector, there's a good chance that they are earning that outside of Kirklees. So living in Kirklees, working somewhere else, bringing that money back into the community. That's fine, that's got a role to play, but what we do see too much of is if you live in Kirklees and you work in Kirklees, you are probably in a low-paid job, and that's the big challenge that we've got to shift over time. Well, you employ a lot of them. So there is definitely something about us as a sector, what the skills that we need, the skills that you need, the career pathways, the hard to fill, and what we can do to try and solve some of our own problems locally as major employers. There's then more about health and well-being, and obviously Professor Towns-Andrews can speak much more about this than I can, but health and well-being as an economic driver, so all the things the university are doing and planning on doing around the Health Innovation Campus, what that means to businesses, why businesses will want to be associated with that, to come here to either collaborate or co-locate, or maybe even spin out of some of that industry-relevant research and practice that's taking place in Huddersfield, supported by things like the investment zone status. So it's a major employer. It's also a major sector in terms of growth. We talk about sectors a lot. This health and wellbeing sector, it's significant for its growth potential and its GVA contributions to the good quality jobs. And then the much broader determinants around healthier places, and this very much links to the conversation you're going to have later this afternoon around some of our town centres and the blueprints. But we know, obviously, we've got the local plan. That is setting down things that will have generational impacts, really, in terms of the Kirklees, the place. We've got a transport strategy. All of these things do and have to more contribute towards health outcomes. I think we all know that, but it's really time that we start turning that into much more tangible actions and delivery. So I think the final two slides is just to tee up that point around future funding and initiatives, where, as I say, the economic development and employment support world and health worlds are going to be moving together and working together much more over the next few years. That, of course, can only be a good thing. There are lots of new initiatives. There's the Trailblazer, there's Connect to Work, there's accelerators, there's the existing Employment West Yorkshire support programme, all with their funding timescales and outputs and rules. And we've got to stitch that together locally so that it's coherent and that it makes sense and it's having the best possible impact. We need to embed the lived experience of the economically inactive residents, disabled groups and others into how we develop those programmes. That's challenging when we've got to get it done really, really quickly to meet timescales, but we need to not forget the voice of the people that we're trying to meet here. Clearly, there's a big thing around avoiding duplication. I am slightly worried about loads of job coaches all running around trying to speak to the same people, all incentivised to keep hold of their clients and not make the right referral. So we have got to step back and look at that across the piece and make sure that the right people are having the right conversations, and if they're not, then they are incentivised to make the right referrals, not hold on to people. And then there's some bigger questions here. I have a real question about this isn't new. This isn't the first time we've been trying to do some of this stuff. So as we try and target and work with harder and harder to reach groups, do we really know what's going to engage them? What's going to be different this time? If we haven't managed to support that person yet, what is it that we're going to do with this? What are we going to do differently this time that really engages them? And I will always say, from my position, we do need to be mindful about employers and what's in it for the employer. You know, some of these people, some of the employment outcomes never going to be appropriate. For some, it's going to be a long road. They've got multiple barriers, and they're going to need a lot of ongoing support when they get there. So how do we sell that to employers? Employers have enormous goodwill to work with us and support those broader outcomes, but they also have businesses to run. And if we are going to ask them to take on long-term unemployed people with multiple barriers to employment, we're going to have to help them as much as we possibly can and stick with them for the long term. And I've mentioned our role as anchor institutions. And again, this is my final slide. Thinking more broadly, teeing up some of the things that I think you as a board will want to consider over a period of time and how it links into the delivery of this economic strategy. Health on the high street, health services closer to the community. What does that really mean? What does that look like? What are the opportunities tied to our town centres and our regeneration ambitions? We know that towns aren't just going to be focused on retail going forward. So is there an opportunity there to look at where people go? I know, talking to Steve, it's easy to say, but it's really difficult to actually do. But that's a big, and it's not new, is it? But interesting to understand all of your different organisations' role and challenges, and this is something Emily and I have been talking about. I would like to pick 2 or 3 things that we collectively commit to really trying to do. There's loads of things you've probably all tried to do, and if we're honest, we know has been found difficult. So is this a bit of an opportunity to linked into what you want to do with the Health and Wellbeing Board to kind of go back and distill around a couple of those priorities and re-galvanise some partnership activity about things that we know would make a difference but we have historically found difficult. So there is a strategy. If you want to have circulated it, if you want to have follow-up conversations offline about the wording, then very, very happy to do so. But this was more about teeing up a bigger partnership conversation about the role of health in delivering some of those objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. And in the run-up to meeting, obviously, I heard a quick word and really appreciate your enthusiasm for working with the board. It really fits in, the inclusive economic strategy really fits in with the ideas we have of how we want to go forward with the board. And as you say, things like what's going to be different this time. As a role of the board, we're not wanting to be a commentary board, a suggestion board. We really want to bring together the partners. It is a strategic partnership. It needs to bring people together to take action, and we are moving forward with plans to come with some real key sort of very specific plans in this year. But how do people feel about the inclusive economic strategy? How can you feed into that, and what does it mean for your organisation? And please ask Edward any questions you have on how that might look.
Firstly, Edward, thank you for that. Actually interesting. A bit of a plea. Health got mentioned a lot, social care didn't, and I think it's really important we don't miss it. It does tend to get left out a little bit, and people think that health encompasses it. It just doesn't. So it's really important, particularly from a point of view of business. There's an awful lot of businesses within the social care sector, independent, private and BCSE sector. And actually in Kirklees, social care businesses employ more people than the NHS and the local authority put together. So I think it's a really crucial bit not to miss. Particularly because a lot of those businesses are the ones that are probably going to be very open to supporting, certainly bringing long-term unemployed people back to work. And I'm really pleased to hear about the ongoing support, because I think that's sometimes why a lot of these schemes fail, isn't it? Somebody gets placed and then it's, you're there, sorted, over to somebody else. And, businesses don't necessarily have the skills or resource to manage all of that. So making sure that some of that's there, it's really good. But everything, I was really interested, and definitely, I know that providers will definitely be behind and looking to support that. I don't need to talk for the VCSE sector, because people here who can do that, but I'm sure that they're not kind of mentioned, they're not encompassed in there either. And it's just really, really important that we don't miss very big chunks of the community if we want it to be truly inclusive.
Thank you, James. Yes, I mean, the social care workforce is 20% of the workforce nationally, isn't it? Before you start adding in health workers. So, the people in this room are regularly representing. And it is a workforce where people are apt to go out of the workforce because of ill health, because of injury. Everything from musculoskeletal to mental health can force you, out of the workforce. We are looking at things to help prevent that in the short term. And if they prove successful, hopefully they will get continued. Have we got some more comments and thoughts? Alistair, did you introduce yourself, Alistair? Did I miss you?
Yes, I did.
Sorry,
I did, I promise.
You.
I can say it again if you want me to. So James gave me a lead in there, didn't he, for the VCS, because I'm obviously here representing third sector leaders. And absolutely, it's really positive to see areas mentioned in that, such as social enterprises, young people in particular, I think is a really important one for us as a district, under 25s and how we get them into the world of work and how we do that very necessary link between further and higher education into actual work, I think is really important how we do that. So that's good to see that as being a bit of a focus. I'm not too aware, Edward, of much communication with third sector leaders or the VCS in particular, but definitely that door's open. So it would be really good to see you or Chris, coming along, or Jonathan, to those sort of sessions and having that engagement there, because I think it's a huge sector locally and there's a massive role for us to play. And an interesting angle on that as well is corporate social responsibility. We're very lucky in Kirklees to have big companies like Cummins and Syngenta who do a fantastic job with corporate social responsibility, really link well with the sector, but we could do with a lot more, and that includes the public sector linking into that corporate social responsibility role as well. So I think this strategy is a really landmark one for us as a district. Yeah, absolutely, there's only so much we can do in a very challenging world environment, but it's down to us to try and do that. I really enjoyed in the past, and I thought were very successful, old Labour government schemes such as Future Jobs Fund, you know, some creativity like that, employers being funded for the first 6 months of employment, taking away a lot of the risk for long-term unemployed getting in there, and certainly CAL, the VCS, and I'm sure some of the public sector partners would be interested in schemes like that, using that learning from the past instead of reinventing, so just to help us get them back into the workplace. But a really positive development, and yeah, VCS definitely part of pushing that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Do you want to come back on that, Edward, at all?
No, just to entirely accept all of those points. Thank you. They're really, really helpful. I think we'll take you up on the opportunity to come and talk to TSL. Yeah, Future Jobs Fund, I mean, it's one of my triggers, I'm afraid. The evaluation of the Future Jobs Fund programme is one of the most clear-cut and powerful things ever. The coalition government scrapped it, but it was fantastic. And that's why I make the point, really, about the role of employers and us as anchor institutions, because there is an argument to say, actually, if we want some of these people to be given employment opportunities, we're going to have to do some of it ourselves.
Yeah, people forget about the employers and they look at the people who are struggling to get back into work. But of course, the VCS sector doesn't have to be unpaid or unsupported. I mean, you know, there's various levels, isn't there? So, you know, people think, oh, I can't volunteer because it's going to cost me. Well, it doesn't have to. Sometimes there's pay involved in that sector too, and it's a fantastic route back to work. Steve, and then
yeah, thank you. Just on the workforce part of it, if it helps just people get a picture of this in their head, there's about 25,000 whole-time equivalents employed across health and social care in Kirklees, which includes social care, includes the VCSE. If you add the volunteers in, that's about another 25,000, so it is a significant workforce. Through the workforce programme we have that's joint with Calderdale, there have been and probably still continue to be lots of examples of those bigger organisations and the smaller ones trying to help people into employment or support them in employment. I think one of the challenges is sticking with that, because as you mentioned, Edward, you do need to be there for the long term, and some of the short-term funding that supported these things is a real challenge. So that was kind of the point I wanted to make around the workforce side of it. But equally, Edward, in terms of how we might help support the implementation of it, we have got that infrastructure there around workforce that could support some of this.
Emily?
I think that point about the long-term support is incredibly important here. I think historically we've sometimes had help to work schemes that have been about, well, here's a job, here's a person, we'll match them together. Here's a person who could get a job if they just had a slightly better suit and a neater haircut, we'll help them get that. This is about going further back and working with people to increase their confidence, increase their experience of going out and being with other people, to build up to the point in which they are able to work and able to work in paid employment. And I don't want to speak on Steffi's behalf, but we've got some really lovely examples from within the community champions world, haven't we, where people have undertaken their first volunteering role, which has moved into a first paid employment role, which has moved into a getting a job that is good for them, not just a job, but a job that supports their self-esteem and their health and well-being. But I think the emphasis there is on the long term and walking alongside that person for a period of time. So
yeah, I think the in-work support is absolutely crucial. Oh, sorry. Am I on?
You are.
It is the in-work support part is absolutely crucial. And I think what you're saying about the volunteers, they've built up that sort of networks. They've started from nothing, then to volunteering, then moving into these roles, but they've built up that support network along the way, whether it's a volunteer coordinator or somebody that's supporting them specifically with employment support. And so then when they get into those roles, that's when it's really, like you were saying, when it's sometimes you move into the role and people think that's it, job done, and it's that in-work support that's really crucial. And it's you don't see that element as much, I think, when you come across certain work programmes, whether it's one-to-one stuff or job clubs. There are a few people who will support people that are in work, or support people to find better work or work that suits them. But I think that part will be really, really crucial, because a lot of people don't have that support network. So when you get into work, you need someone to hold your hand.
That's great, Steffi, and that's pop your mic off so we can hear it on the thing. But yeah, that's fantastic, because the fantastic work of the champions, not only do they do fantastic work, it is a fantastic scheme to build people up, and they get paid, don't they? You told me the other day, so they're not just volunteers, and there's no just about volunteers. The world would grind to a halt without volunteers. Liz?
Yeah, I think, Edward, you'll know that I totally support that inclusivity piece, because the vision and the ambition for the health campus is all about recognising that people's health and their well-being is at the heart of productivity growth. You can do as much business development as you like, but if the people aren't happy and they're not employed, you know, and it's the low-hanging fruit, to be honest. Because when you look at the costs on the economy of absenteeism, benefits, it's huge. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle to me, but the inclusivity piece is the crux of it all. I think you mentioned the Trailblazer and what's going on there, and the Get Britain Working. I told Emily as well that I had a meeting with, is it Joe Ledgard from Department of Work and Pensions, because for me, they have always been a difficult government department to actually get on board and engage with, but they are one of the biggest stakeholders in what we're doing in this inclusivity strategy. And she's really up for it. She's one of the regional partners around that. She was also the advisor for Wicker on the investment zone for DWP, so she tells me. But she's really up for doing something innovative with us, with DWP, around jobs and employment and health and well-being. She gets it. So I think maybe we ought to have a conversation with her to see how we get DWP really to roll their sleeves up and engage, because for me they are a massive, massive stakeholder. In terms of the voluntary sector and the community champions, we're working with them really, really well. And in fact, Andy Petrie and Michael are organising a big workshop down in the Daphne Steel on the 30th with lots of VS organisations about strategically how we work together around this inclusive piece. Because for me, if we don't have that lived experience and understand the communities and their needs, we've got to hear the voice of the people. And you said it, I'm just re-quoting back at what you said, Edward. So we're on with that. So if we can build on that and take it forward with you, it might help in delivery. The other thing that I have a vision for the third building on the campus, which is a community catalytic building. I don't want buildings to be a barrier to people either. So I've got through to full bid stage with the Jules Thorne Foundation. And it's about bringing the community in and people in with the lived experience, and our stakeholders, so likes of Steve and people in this room who've been involved with my initial thoughts around the idea for that third building. But it's about bringing the community in to work with us to help us design the building itself, rather than just shoving a building up, getting the voice of the people and actually starting to integrate. So we're doing a lot. I think if we can support you in any way in delivering this inclusive strategy, I'm there.
That sounds fantastic. It gets more and more exciting on the campus every time I hear a bit more. We have got a co-production board at the council, which we haven't quite got to the level of what you would call total co-production, but they've got a great consultation, talk to and work with an array of people. So I would happily hand them over to work with you, or you come and work with them. I think they'd be really, really keen to be involved. The woman who deals with that is Tamsin McDonald, and she's got a really widespread group of people from all disability backgrounds and that to give you some input on that side of things if you'd like. And they're also working with, they have people on board from a new disability group that's going to cover across Kirklees called Kinetic, and they've got some really well-versed people who've got their own disabling issues and that physical or mental, but they've got lots and lots of great background information, and there's some really useful people in there that would be able to work with you or for you even if you have positions. Steffi, you wanted to come back in?
Oh, I'm getting it now, aren't I? I was just picking up on the communities thing again. I think that it might sound really obvious, but they will be really crucial as well in picking up those people and identifying those people that are struggling with either staying in their employment or finding work. I mean, you will get your usual people who are identified through the DWP or through some other channels, but you will miss those people if you don't have that community involvement, those people that might only go and talk to somebody at the community centre that they're familiar with. So I think it's just, it sounds really obvious, but it's just really important to make sure we don't miss that part so that we're identifying those people that might not come forward through the usual routes.
Thank you, Steffi. And just sort of popping back to Liz there, the DWP is one of the arms that we want to come into the Health and Wellbeing Board. So we're looking for an ideal person. So while you're chatting, she's possibly a bit up the tree to be prepared to come and join us in Kirklees' own Wellbeing Board. But if she's got any key suggestions as somebody who will come and be our link here, we're looking for a member from the DWP to help us coordinate with that side of things and maybe think of some innovative stuff that we can do to, be able to get people into work or help them volunteer then to get into work without it affecting their benefits and other such things. Tom, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was really good to see the section on children and young people as a priority. I guess a few things for me. Given the fact we're looking at the kind of learning and skills agenda and we want people, and particularly children and young people, to grow up and stay in Kirklees, I don't know where the link is or if there is any link with our Kirklees Futures, which is obviously our learning strategy, which makes our kind of outcomes and focus really clear. So I'd probably like to see a bit of a link there, which I think could be useful. Really pleased to see about extending our care leavers offer, and I'd be really interested to hear on the detail on that and what that looks like, and if you want any kind of joint working about what that looks like, that'd be good. And particularly in terms of the impact of child poverty, the impact on families, how we're going to focus on our most disadvantaged children and young people to make sure that they've got better life chances, I'm really interested in. So, our children and young people and families where additional needs are present are often struggling financially for a number of reasons, whether that's caring responsibilities, etc. We're also seeing a growing number of people in the population who are economically inactive due to social, emotional and mental health problems, and actually how can we harness the real skills of our children going into adults who've got things like autism and other conditions which actually really need harnessing in a really positive light in the workplace. And then thinking mainly as well, how do we focus on our most disadvantaged communities and children and young people? Because also that brings down a link into crime, excuse me, and youth violence as well, because actually if you live in a disadvantaged community and you're a young person and you don't see any way out of that community apart from getting involved in crime, to have an income, then actually increasing aspiration and looking at that. So, I think, without saying the children are our future and being all corny and all that, if you think, or singing, I definitely won't sing, if you think about it, that focus is absolutely right, Edward, isn't it? Because actually what we're talking about is the workforce of the future. But good to see, I like the strategy as well. I think it's really clear. And
I'm glad to hear that there's going to be a lot of conversations outside of the meetings, because we always say the meetings are about thinking about what you want to do, where you want to go, and we're all getting on the same page and coming back, talking to each other, but the actual work and the big stuff gets done in between the meetings.
Thanks. Hi, Chris Fox from Connect Housing. I'd really like the strategy. It really feels holistic and grounded in reality, so I love that. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But just to have it recognised about the contribution of affordable housing, good quality affordable housing, giving people a stable home, and the contribution that housing providers make to place in neighbourhoods as well. So to see that reflected is great. I don't work on the development side of things. I'm more on the management side of things. But I know development from my colleagues, it sounds like it's incredibly difficult. So anything that can be done to help on that front, I think would help. But yeah, I like strategy, thank you.
Yes, of course, where you live, where you start your day and end your day and have to spend all day if you don't have work, or if you can't work, then, you know, clearly that changes who you think you are and who you feel you are and what you feel your part is in society. I'll come to you in a minute. I'll come to Michelle first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a comment. I think everybody's said and been very, you know, complimentary about the strategy. It is really good. And I suppose the challenge is, and I think you posed the question in your slides, Edward, is where do we start? What are the priorities for this board, and how do we make sure that we're targeting those priorities in a timely but also a realistic way? So I just wonder whether there's been any thought to, because it's a big, massive agenda. And everybody obviously wants a piece of it, and everybody wants to, you know, to set their contribution. I suppose the question is, how long is this strategy going to stretch? Where does it start? Where are the first priorities going to be set? And who's going to be setting those priorities? I suppose that'll be down to Cabinet once it goes through the governance. But I think, do we start small where we know that we can target and get some really good quick wins, or do we start with big ambition? It's just a point, because I know you said it's in draft, but I couldn't see it within any of the documents.
That's to Jonathan. It's a 5-year strategy, so we'll be here again in 4.5 years. I guess for me, it's a really good question, isn't it? It's critical. There's obviously a bit, in a lot of the economic stuff we talk about, given the points we've made, just how holistic it is, how the macroeconomic factors weigh, and the limited levers and resource that we have locally. Sometimes, the front end of the strategy is massive, and the action plan sometimes can feel a little bit like a pea shooter. The priorities, I think, are probably, again, it's hard to, everyone says we need to focus on a small number of priorities. You'll know how difficult that is, because so many things are priorities. I have a bit of a breakout into song in terms of it's less about what we do and more about how we do it. Because I think the what we do will probably be very similar to what we've done before. So we'll do employability programs, we'll work with people, we'll work with the businesses, we'll have a startup program, we'll do a lot of the things, we'll do transport initiatives, we'll do a lot of the traditional economic development things. So I've come to the view that I've not found loads of stuff that we said we've been doing the wrong thing. We're just going to stop that and do something completely different. But it's about how we do it and the kind of conversations that you've just had for the last half an hour and following through those. So it's about the work outside the meetings, really, to extract those extra outcomes from everything that we currently do. So I think a lot of the initiatives, a lot of the actions are probably already in train or planned. There will be new opportunities. So obviously a lot of the resource isn't going to come directly from us. We work a lot through the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. We're talking about future devolution. There's definitely opportunities there with DWP, I would suggest. But we do get to bid for money. So there will be some new opportunities. And so some of these conversations is about focusing what we get the chance to bid on in future. But I think the bulk of it for me is about how we do some of the things we're already doing.
I think the already doing is okay, because I'm sure we do lots of really great stuff. But I think looking forward, we do look at, new actions, new opportunities and new ways of working, because otherwise the problems we have would have already been solved or be on a clear trajectory to be being solved. And I don't think they all are, and I think that's why we've got to look at how we're going to make some real hard-nosed, hard-hitting targets on wellbeing, which will incorporate the, working, the economic strategy, how people get back to work. I was going to ask a question of our health partners in a minute, but I noticed that Karen from Locale has been waiting patiently online. Sorry, it's hard to spot you up there sometimes when you're on the screen. Would you like to go, and then you, Emily?
Yeah, it's a fantastic strategy, isn't it? It's hard to to not agree with everything that's in here. I suppose the thing for me is, as well as how are we going to ensure that through regular updates and reporting we know it's making a difference, so that we can change our tactics if it's not? So how are we going to measure this? How are we going to set those outcomes that we're after very carefully? And I might have not heard it, I might have kept breaking up. So I just think it's important that we're able to do that and then flex our approach if we need to, back to the how we're doing it conversation.
Do you need to come back on that, Edward, or just take that?
Well, yeah, no, it's another challenging area. So obviously there is economic evidence in the data that sits behind it. We do periodic reporting on that. So I would say, for example, for me, the absolute headline basket of indicators would be something about average earnings, something around skills levels, because we know skills is the gateway to so many things, but skills as a proxy for other measures, and ultimately about the inclusion and the gap, the inequality gap, and is that closing or not closing. And the challenge with some of that stuff is it's going to be 10 years before you really know whether you've made a difference. So I report on the employment rate every quarter, and it doesn't change. So this stuff happens over a long period of time unless there's an economic shock. So it's a long-term generational thing. But yeah, absolutely, we do need to report and monitor against those things. But it's not going to be kind of quarter by quarter adjustments. Some of this is about the long term. One of my favourite anecdotes while I've got the mic is how do you keep a bonsai tree small? Where you keep picking it up and messing with its roots. Well, that's what we do in this country with our skills systems and some of our economic development initiatives. We need to stop picking it up every few years and playing with the roots and bed stuff in and keep going with what we know works for a long time.
I think we do need to hold fast. We need to find some really good action to take and hold fast till we can see some outcomes. Well, reviewing is great, but, things, like you say, it's turning a tanker, isn't it? You've got to move in the right direction consistently. Emily?
Thank you. So a few things from me. It's been a really interesting conversation to listen to. There's something really important about recognising that 10% of your health outcomes are about whether or not you've seen a doctor. The rest are about how and where you live your life. And this economic strategy and the work that Joanne's going to talk to us about later as well is about the how and where you live your life. And the impact of that cannot be underestimated. I think there's something for me about recognising that a lot of the conversation we've had today has been around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and get that underlying decent house, somewhere you feel safe, people you love, stuff right, then we will have a population who can achieve their potential, and we've got to keep that at the heart. And some of that sounds a bit kind of motherhood and apple pie and a little bit, oh, bless, that's sweet. But actually, if we don't get that right, we will not make the progress that we need to make. I think there was something, James, in your point about the quantity of the workforce within social care, and how can we make the most of that workforce and the opportunities to work with those opportunities to get people into work. I really want us to pick up on that. Alistair, you made a point about corporate social responsibility and how we properly get hold of that and work with our big providers to help them make the most of their corporate social responsibility offer. And that leads me to my last point, which was a question for the panel. How do the Health and Wellbeing Board better engage with businesses? How do we do that? How do we get their voice here consistently, rather than it being us going, well, we've had a conversation at the Health and Wellbeing Board, can I go and talk to Syngenta? How do we do that?
Hello. Yeah, that's a very good point, Emily. I think what we are getting much better at is understanding, I suppose, the kind of wider, that from a corporate responsibility or ESG, is that kind of perspective. I think we're getting much better at understanding the very distinctive interests that our major employers have, and that's beginning to bear some fruit. And we're tying them into local networks much better. Without actually specifically answering your question, I think there is, you know, undoubtedly what we can do, as, you know, as your agenda for the next sort of, you know, 18, 24 months becomes clearer. I think what we can do through the business team is help to convene the employers who are going to be most interested and most supportive of the specifics, because, you know, we know, you know, come-ins are probably, you know, have a slightly different focus in terms of the kind of wider CSR work that they want to do to UK Greetings or to Reliance Precision. And, you know, I think we're getting a much better understanding of those nuances. So I think we can, you know, rather than wheeling out the same organisations all of the time, I think we can help to kind of refine the ask, and happy to be in the middle of that.
I think I definitely need to have a chat with you about that, Chris, and where we've got more time.
Briefly, if I come in, I think sometimes we can fall into the trap of underestimating the goodwill and willingness to support these sort of agendas that does come from the private sector. But what they will want is they will want it to be made easy. They will want to be clear on what. So, you know, there's 101 things that we might want businesses to do. They can't deal with that. Just give them a choice of a few things and let them pick, and then get on and deliver it, I think would be the key messages.
That sounds great. James?
With my other business hat on, absolutely everything you said, couldn't agree more, from a social care point of view. So just to pick up on, I didn't mention social care earlier, one of the drivers was around low pay, and I just thought I'd throw out there that some of the lowest paid people in Kirklees work within social care and the VCSE sector, and that's through our funding arrangements. And it's not, I don't want to get all political about funding, but that's the reality. And so if we really want to engage with some of this work, that's a massive a part of our work population that we could do something about if we were prepared to grab the nettle on it. And these are local people working in local communities, spending that money in those local communities. You know, a care assistant's not going to go and get a job in Manchester and live in Dewsbury. They're going to get a job in Dewsbury and spend the money in Dewsbury. So it makes economic sense. If we put more money in their pockets, they're going to spend more money locally. And I think it's every pound that goes into the pocket of an employee can make £5 for the local community. You know, big play around funding, and I know I'm not foolish. I know the situation we're in, but we've got an opportunity, I think.
I think specifically, James, for us is we keep talking and we do everything we can, because, you know, in my role, and I know as the council as a whole, we're very keen to support the social care sector in the best way we possibly can. Steve?
Hi, I was just going to ask Edward, in the action plan that you're developing, so you had a plan on a page, which was great, but having a quick scan across that plan on a page, not all the social determinants of health are on it. Safety wasn't there, which is a key one. Not obvious, I mean, it was quick, but I just wondered whether, because the social determinants of health are really key, that in the action plan, I think it's important that there's something specific addressing each one, because, I mean, okay, some are a lot less weighted than others, so you've got some of the big ones in there, but what I've started to do at the university, for example, is I'm using the social determinants of health to show a mirror to our academic schools, to see how they can all engage in that health and wellbeing agenda. And I think using the social determinants as a vehicle for bringing together partnership and co-working around an inclusive economy, because everybody can see themselves in it. So having that reflected in the action plan, I think, is probably worthwhile.
We have a following action plan to come, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, for example, would be in some of the place section in town centres. We might talk about safety, or some of the town centre blueprints that would sit under the strategy might talk about safety. But I like the idea about having almost running down the side the determinants, and then you could check against it. That's a good idea. Yeah, do that.
Great. Steve?
Thank you. I was just going to make a couple of observations and then a few thoughts about how we might take some of the work forward. So one of the duties of integrated care systems, of which we're all part of for Kirklees and across West Yorkshire, is to actually support that wider social and economic development. So that's one of the big changes that came in when the current system was introduced. I think, like a lot of this stuff, it's easy to write it in a strategy, but more difficult to take it forward. Just a personal observation, if you'd have asked me 3 years ago what the West Yorkshire Combined Authority was, you'd have got a very blank look. I think now some of the working that's in place between the Combined Authority and the ICB at West Yorkshire is starting to make that less of a mystery, and we're beginning to understand what some of that means. The work that you kind of referenced, Edward, in terms of, you know, the accelerator and the trailblazer, yeah, the timescales are difficult, it's challenging, but I do think that gives us a real opportunity to do some of this stuff for real over the next sort of 12 to 15 months with a bit of an eye to the long term. If in that we can touch on as many of the things as people mentioned in terms of working with the domiciliary and care home sector, working with children and young people, working with those communities where people might find it much more difficult to get a job. We won't be able to do all of it because it's not a panacea, but the more of that we do through the next sort of 12 to 15 months, the better. I know examples from a lot of the organisations in the room, and there'll be others that I don't know about, where people are doing stuff that is directly relevant to the economic strategy. I think the more we talk to each other about this, the more we realise what it is we can do. Because I think sometimes something like the economic strategy, we all go, yeah, that's really good, but actually it's still somebody else's job to do. But I think the more we do share those examples, I genuinely think it'll kind of unlock things in people's heads, and that'll lead to more work that people do. And there's so much more stuff going on out there than any of us are cognizant of. So it's about understanding that. But talking to your point, it's not just going, oh, look, it's all happening, great, we don't need to do anything. But I think the sum of the parts isn't there yet. And the more of that we can do, I think, the better as well. So they were just my observations.
I think some of that is about bringing it all together at the same time, in Kirklees, moving forward in the same direction. Because that's one of the aims with this plan we have for the Health and Wellbeing Board, is to get on the same page, to do the things and target specific areas, even if those are small areas. Whilst everything's going on in the big picture and carrying on, to pick some very key target spots, might be very small, where you can actually proliferate all the things you'd love to do in big scale, but you can't do all at once everywhere. That was one of the things you're talking about, is what is going on elsewhere. That's one of my questions for the health partners was, you know, I'm sure you do some things with people to return to work, to stay in work, or if there isn't things going on right this minute, things that have gone on, because even I've been through some of those things, you know, where there were great schemes to get people back to work or help stay in work, and they've ended, the funding's ended, and this is the longevity that Edward's so keen to make sure we get, because that really is very important. Sorry, I'll come back to the health providers and see if you've got anything that you can share on that before I just go to the back first.
I think, you know, from a health perspective, what I was about to say fits with what you've just said there. From a health perspective, really welcome this strategy, the inclusivity of it. I think it's twofold for us because we are one of the largest employers. I work for the Acute Trust, so we are one of the largest employers, so there's a huge impact there. But also I welcomed your reference to people who are on the waiting list being of working age and the degree to what that waiting list is made up of. We're in a period of time where waiting lists are longer, whilst we might have some of the best waiting times, doing a plug there, but we might have some of the best waiting times in the country within Kirklees. We also are in a position where they are longer than they have been in a number of years. Those patients on those waiting lists that are of working age, they're not just people that are waiting for a quick operation and can go back to work. Some of these are people with long-term conditions who, whilst they are waiting for treatment, may be de-skilling. So I think there's something we need to think about, how we support those patients while they're waiting and make sure that we are equipping them with skills to maybe go into different types of roles moving forward, or making sure that we are supporting them in their working roles to be able to attend their work. The other side for me is around the preventative as well, because we know that there's a direct link between people's economic status, so people living in more deprived areas, and when they are accessing health, so their health is deteriorating more quickly, which is again costing the economy more money. Through various different avenues of work, social care, pensions, everything. And what can we do to support those people who maybe cannot afford to have that time off work because they're in lower paid roles or able to access health in the same way as someone who would be paid sick pay, for example. So I think there's some things that we need to think about there about how we can work as partners on that one.
Thank you. And we would sit here and think that pay for your day is something that happens in Africa, where in COVID people couldn't stop working in the cities because what they earned that day put the tea on the table that night. But, you know, we really do have populations in our areas that are living in virtually the same. They might get paid weekly, but that's the pay for that week and there's nothing left. If you have a day off, you don't get paid. So I would put that question that I raised, you know, what have we got already going on? Are there some big schemes for returning to work, keeping in work for people at the moment in our health service?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I guess I'd like to talk about two schemes within mental health, which I'm sure people are aware is one of the largest drivers of health inequality within that long-term sickness cohort that we're talking about, particularly around depression and anxiety. So within Kirklees, within Swift, we have two major projects that are running at the moment that are long-term, thankfully, not short-term funded. One looks at working with people who have a diagnosis of a serious mental ill health. It's an individual placement and support service which works with people who are in employment to return to employment. It works with people who have never worked, who want to work. It's a barrier, what we call a barrier-free service. So all that individual needs to do is say that they wish to work. They may never have worked before. They may be currently under secondary care services, so some of the most unwell people with mental health. And our IPS services will stay with those individuals until they've received a job, then they'll provide in-work support for them. Again, plugging the service, I would like to say that the Kirklees IPS service received the highest score for any employment service in the NHS in the entire of the UK. So we do have some very good models for how to deliver individual placement and support. That works now. We are expanding that out into our primary care network. So working with not only people within secondary care, but working with people who are in primary care. So these might be people, for example, who have reached the point of their second sick note. So we would work with those people to try and return them back to work, but also try and find people who aren't in contact with the secondary care services, but do have a serious mental ill health to try and help them return to a good job. I think there was a point somebody else made about not all jobs are good jobs, and what's really important for trying to maintain people into jobs is making sure that there's a good job fit and that it's a good job that will sustain their health and well-being. And additionally, to make the point that one of the biggest indicators of them not relapsing into your mental ill health is retaining in employment. It has massive benefits in terms of self-esteem. The other scheme I'd just briefly like to mention is we have a service that's Talking Therapies. Many of you all know that. They also have an employment advice section to it, which works specifically with people with depression and anxiety, using that same individual placement and support model, and that is working again with primary care populations to try and address the massive health inequalities that are that people with mental ill health are subject to. So two examples, I suppose, of how we're already doing that, and I absolutely appreciated the point that you make that there are pockets of work going on around this all over the place, and finding out what everybody is doing and pulling that best examples and how we can work using the good practice that's already there, I think is really important. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That sounds great. I mean, it's really about thriving, not just surviving and, you know, getting back to work, but not the inappropriate work. I'm going to let Edward get off because he has got somewhere else he has to be, but we're keeping Jonathan and Chris for a bit. Yeah, right. So, it's the Borg. Once you're amalgamated in, you don't get to leave. So, yeah, that's great. But we have somebody else at the back there. Remind me what your name is. So new again from?
It's Claire from Change Grow Live.
Change Grow Live, one of our new partners in the partnership.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you've mentioned IPS because we're also commissioned to deliver that. And the model itself is really, really effective. It's different to different types of employment support. We presented recently the Combating Drugs Partnership. And it's fantastic that the Kirklees services are some of the leading services in the country. We've recently been audited and we're also national leading as well. So it's wonderful to hear that across the sector we're implementing this model really, really effectively. I would advocate for this instead of traditional job coaching or other types of employment because it works differently. It matches an individual at any stage in our world recovery journey. So people may still be using alcohol at problematic levels and may wish to gain employment while still engaging with us. And it matches employers who we talk to and provide the support that they need to help that person stay in employment. And that is long-term support. And just reflecting on many of the comments that have been made here today, I think one of the reasons why we are so successful across the area is that long-term support to employers, which has been mentioned by a number of different people. So I suppose my query is, how can we look at something that's already working well in at least 2 organisations and expand that across the sector using the same principles to give more people the opportunity to gain support and gain employment?
Yes, that's great. That's a really good point. I think something's working. It's not necessarily the same for MSK or something, but the principles of that long-term support. And also people talk about people going into hospital, maybe older people going into hospital and deconditioning. When you're out of work, you're deconditioning for work. If you've got an MSK problem, you've probably mental health deteriorated, you don't feel like you're part of society. I'm sure we could talk for quite a bit longer on this, but we are going to take a short break. We will be revisiting lots of this, and I do hope that you will carry on and have these conversations outside of the meeting. When we come back, we'll be going into private session, just so we can have a bit more of a free-flowing conversation. But at that point, Joanne Bartholomew is going to join us and speak about the regeneration in Dewsbury and Huddersfield. Some really exciting things to see there, lots of detail for you. Some of you will have seen some of it before, but the way we're going to talk about it is really with that well-being overview. So I think we'll come back as past for the second session. Yeah. Jenny? Yeah. So we'll come back at past.